Hello, everybody. Welcome back to HENNGE Talks, day 2. I hope you all had a very nice break. For those of you joining us for the first time, HENNGE Talks is an opportunity for you guys to get to know B2B cloud security, how we work in the industry, hear from some experienced professionals about their experiences, and hopefully you can get some insight into what it's like to actually work in the field and potentially work with some of these amazing people. So yeah, just to recap the schedule for the day, the first session today, for those of you who missed it, was UI UX. So you got a little deep dive into how they collaborate and work on real issues. And we got to get like a little demo of how they actually solve the problem. So for those of you who missed it, please check it out from our website. Second session today, the session right now is front end. So they'll be going deep into how they implemented this new technology to make their work much easier. They don't have to bother people. You'll hear much more, so please stay tuned. And our final session of the day is workation, new working style. All this, it'll be including Ogura-san, our CEO, CTO as well. So please stay tuned. It'll be a very insightful talk that you can get some idea of how we are going to approach remote working going forward, how the situation has affected us as a company, and how maybe your company can approach it as well. So yeah, without further ado, I would like to, before I hand it over, please be sure to ask your questions to the Q&A in the chat, not in the chat, in the Zoom setting below. Yeah. We'll be answering at the end, so yeah, please keep those questions coming. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Abid and the front-end crew to start the talk.
Thank you, Sean. Just 1 second. Cool, slides are up. Welcome to Front-End Focus. We're joined today by Musin and Henry, and I'm your host, Abid. I'm a front-end engineer. I am from South Africa, and I am currently working at HENNGE. I am a recent joiner, and I've learned a ton of things from these two individuals. So why don't you guys introduce yourselves?
Okay, so hello, everyone. My name is Henry. I came from Indonesia. I studied and worked at Indonesia and also in Taiwan before joining HENNGE. I've been in HENNGE for 4 years as a front-end engineer, and I'm currently leading the front-end team in my product team. Very glad to be here.
It's good to have you here, Henry.
And my name is Musin. I also am in the same team as Henry. I joined HENNGE last year in September. It's been a little over a year now. Before joining HENNGE, I was in a startup in the travel industry. Amongst other things, I was working on internal tools such as our in-house booking system or custom dashboards for analytics, and very happy to be here.
Great to have you guys here. So please tell me a little bit about the product you guys work on, and maybe a little bit about your team too.
Okay, so both me and Musim is from the same product team. It's called, we're working on a product called HENNGE Email DLP. And DLP stands for Data Loss Prevention. And a good way of looking into this is like, when we think of emails, we sometimes set up filters like in Gmail. We want to set up filters to make sure that emails that comes from a specific address or from a specific domain will be categorized separately. We do something a bit similar. We set up rules, but for outgoing emails for our clients, which is other businesses. So we make sure that emails that are going outside of the company are filtered by certain rules, and the admins can set the rules they want. Like they want the emails to be temporarily suspended to make sure like there is nothing wrong before they are actually sent. It can also be that the manager of the team would be required to approve the email before it is allowed to be sent. We also have some extra security features on top, such as encryption. Also, we have another feature that will send the attachment securely to like a cloud storage to be downloaded later.
Yeah, it's something that I wish I had at my previous company. We usually, for VIP clients, what we used to do is before sending out an email, we had to have manual check. Someone would have to go there, look at the screen, check the email, the content, check the attachments, make sure that it was okay to send, and then we would do it. And yeah, I wish we had that at the time.
Likewise, it brings back some terrible memories from my previous company, but I've heard your team has implemented a very interesting way of, accessing data using GraphQL and AppSync. It's a method that doesn't necessarily require like a backend team or backend support. Tell me a little bit about that. What was the problem you guys were trying to solve?
Yeah, so it all started from a need for the front-end team to store a part of the user state that we were already managing with a state management library. And we needed this state to be persistent. We needed to persist the state between across not only page reloads, but also across devices and across multiple browsers if needed. This data would all be data that is related to the UI. So it's not mission critical data. It's not data that has to do with the application logic. It was just data that we needed for the UI, such as, say, the theme or the display language, things like that. And we wanted to have a way in the front end to manage this data entirely on our side. Usually before that, what we used to do is we would consult with the backend, ask them, hey, we want to add this piece of data, and the backend would have to coordinate with us and make space for that, add a row, add a column in the table. It just needed some coordination between the two teams, and we wanted to simplify this flow because at the end of the day, the data was all UI related. So it also made sense for us to track it entirely in the front-end team.
And well, I've heard of using tools such as, Flagger for like dynamic configurations, or maybe, Firebase. But why exactly did you guys decide to use AppSync?
So one of our main requirement in this case is using AWS because we're deep into the AWS ecosystem. We use AWS for every service, for every backend infrastructure that we use. So that would be the big requirement. And that immediately leads us to AppSync as one of the options. One other thing that we would like to have, since this infrastructure is going to be managed by the front-end team, would be, if it's possible, to use JavaScript or even TypeScript would be better to write the code for everything. We also consider the shape of the data that we want to store. We want to store like a simple key value store. And we found that AWS's DynamoDB is a good match for this. And then we also found that AppSync manages most of the infrastructure for us, which is a big feature, because we don't have to do a lot of like manual fine-tuning to make everything work. Also, one final thing is GraphQL. It's something that is a bit new, like not very new, but something that we haven't been using and we're eager to try out.
Yeah, I think for me, GraphQL gives me shivers down my spine. It's a new technology, and I think whenever you're trying to implement, something with a new technology, and you have, a mature team like HENNGE, things get a bit difficult. So, what kind of preparation did you guys do in order to prepare for this journey towards using GraphQL and AppSync?
Yeah, the research was quite involved for this product. We first of all wanted to make sure that that the product fit our needs. Okay, so we wanted to use AppSync, we wanted to use GraphQL. We were very eager to try it out, but does it actually work? So the first thing we did was try out on the console itself on AWS. Just try out the products. They have some very easy to use playgrounds, both for AppSync or other components that we used, such as Lambda functions. We could just go in there and work on a proof of concept on a prototype without even involving the client at all at that stage. We just wanted to make sure that it all worked and that the flow of the data would actually be what we needed for this feature. Other things that we looked into as far as research was type generation. As Henry just mentioned, we wanted to use TypeScript if possible. And we were looking into ways to maybe generate types automatically. We ended up not going for that at the moment. We wanted the implementation to be fast, so we decided to just create the types manually. But there are out there solutions. One of them we looked into was Amplify, that through a CLI would be able to generate types just from your GraphQL, from your AppSync project. So yeah, that was some of the things that we had to research and look into.
Yeah, it seems very thorough, but I mean, at the moment, from my perspective, I'm hearing authorizers, I'm hearing lambdas, AppSync, how does this all fit together? I mean, what does the data flow look like? How is this data traveling? Just maybe break down the architecture a little bit for me. And I believe you guys have prepared, a little diagram. So thank you for the hard work.
We have a little diagram here to illustrate how the data would move, how the data flow works. How about you take a look at it?
Okay, so yeah, as we can see on the screen, the communication will be between clients and also like our entire infrastructure in AWS. So we will make a GraphQL request directly to AppSync, and AppSync will first contact the Lambda authorizer. It will verify the token that we use to make sure that the user is indeed authorized to make this call to get data or to set data. And after everything is okay, AppSync will call another Lambda function called a Lambda resolver. Here it will do the logic to assign the data to the correct row and column in DynamoDB.
So I see you've presented 2 bits of client code as well. And firstly, I will say I am an ex-Vue user. I love Vue, but since I've used React, it's been a wonderful time. So I don't know, maybe someone gonna start a fight in the comments, but I'm curious to see how that goes. So yeah, maybe tell me a little bit about what I'm looking at.
Yeah, as you can see here, we have some snippets for how you would consume an GraphQL API. We have examples for React and Vue. We currently use Vue. As you can see here, these hooks come composable and hooks for React and Vue. They come from Apollo, the library that we chose to use. And the usage is pretty much the same across frameworks. You are importing a use mutation function, which you can use to then make a call to the API. And this call will return you the data and the loading state, as well as an error if any error occurs.
Yeah. The front end, for me, it looks simple enough, pretty straightforward, and it's quite pleasing. But I believe the bread and butter really is the schema, the GraphQL schema. So maybe break that down a little bit too.
Okay. So first of all, when we start building something with AppSync, what we want to define is the schema. And in the slide here, you can see how we define the schema for our product. So in our case, we are showing a sample feature where we want the user to set the dark theme preference in the product. And in our case, we defined like a few mutations. So in GraphQL, there are queries and mutations, queries to get data and mutations to set data. In our case, we defined like several mutations, put state to modify the entire state. Or we can also like define put language, put dark theme to modify a specific feature. We also define the query that we have. In our use case, we needed to get the entire state directly. We don't need to get a specific piece of feature only. So we only declare this one. And also we declare like the user state type, which is like the type of data that is stored in DynamoDB. And we also needed to define another one called an input, which is used by AppSync's GraphQL to mark this as like a payload that it will receive for a mutation.
Well, I mean, like 4 little keywords, that's or 3, that's simply enough for me. I mean, I'm pretty happy looking at that. But what is this? This event object. This looks a bit more scary to me.
Yeah. So when we saw the initial flow, right, the request would make its way to AppSync. It would be authorized or rejected depending on the validity of the user's token. And then if authorized, it would go into the Lambda authorizer. Now, what goes into the Lambda authorizer is this object here. This is one of the arguments that the Lambda function takes. And as you can see here, it has all the information needed to perform the operation required by this call. So going in order, you can see we have arguments. This is the actual payload that has been sent. So in this scenario that we set here, the user has clicked on a button to enable dark theme. And so they are turning the dark theme on. And you can see here that the payload is dark theme true. Identity, here for the sake of the example, it's null, but what you would have here in an actual implementation is the user ID or any kind of data that you use to identify your user. And this would be resolved and passed by the Lambda authorizer. Yeah, basically the authorizer looks at the token. Yes, this user, I recognize them. Their name is, say, Musin. Here is their request, and it all comes to the resolver. Here we just shortened the headers because there were many AWS related headers. And then an important part here is the info object. The info object has a list of important data, such as what is the call that is actually being made right now. The call that we're doing is the field name, put dark theme. What type of operation is it? Is it a query? Is it a mutation? So this is all the information that your resolver needs to be able to move on to processing the request.
Well, thank you. I mean, you shed a lot of light on that very grayscale page, but yeah, I think the next part is the Lambda resolver. And I hear Lambdas a lot, so eventually I started playing around with it. So this isn't anything that should be too shocking to the audience, but maybe break down a little bit of what we have.
So Lambda is basically like just a function that you call for people who are not aware of AWS terminologies. So AppSync will call a function which we call the Lambda resolver, and we divide the function call into like it's a main file, the index file, and also like a file that is responsible for each function. So for this part, I'll explain about the main file, which is the index file, which I think for front-end engineers, this must be like everyday thing to you, looking at index.js file. And the code here is also not that complicated, I think. So what we do is we read the several arguments that Musin mentioned earlier from the event object, the arguments key, the identity key, and the info key. We get all the necessary options, the payload that the user is sending, what operation does the user want to do, and also their identity. And we call the appropriate function to execute the correct mutation. In this case, the user ID is necessary because we use it as the primary key for the table.
Forgive me for asking, but I did notice that one of your concerns was using TypeScript. And I did notice this is in JavaScript. So I'm hoping, this is all still TypeScript friendly.
Yeah, actually it is.
That's
yeah,
great.
This is JavaScript just for like ease of explanation.
Mm.
We don't need to like see all the types that might hinder like the ease of understanding what we're trying to do. The actual operation is actually not that complex.
Yeah, I believe this is like the AWS playground. So yeah, I mean, great tool to get started with new technology. Yeah, definitely.
The actual implementation itself is in TypeScript, and before we put it on Lambda, we transpile it. So if we were to show the code after the implementation in TypeScript and transpiled, it would be very hard to go through.
Very true. Well, yeah, we have the mutation handle, another Lambda resolver. Maybe break that down.
Yep. So as we saw in the Lambda resolver, we had a switch statement that chose the correct function to call depending on which operation you are performing. In this case, since we are performing put dark theme, we are running the function that is in the putdarktheme.js file. Here, this function is also very simple. What it does is it just initializes a DynamoDB client so that we can make calls to DynamoDB. We create a parameter object. Basically, in there, we want to change the record for this user. We want to change this key. In this case, we want to change dark theme. We want to set it to the value of the payload. In this case, it's true. And then return value is once the operation is done, we want you to return us the result of the element of the object post modification. So you could also choose to receive both pre-modification and post-modification. For our use case, we decided to go with the post-modification. And yeah, we try to make that call, and once that call is performed, we just return the results object.
Thank you. And before we continue, I'm just very excited about the React View war going on. You guys keep it up there. It's really exciting. Okay, so we look at the next screen and I'm seeing DynamoDB. This is screaming back into me. What is going on?
Yeah, this is just the result of the previous operation. So you can imagine that this record had same user ID, dark theme was false, and the language here is English. Post modification, post the call, this is now true. So now that the record is true, the user, whenever the user loads their page, this is what will be pulled, and they will have dark theme enabled anytime until they change it again.
Well, I mean, that's great. I'm glad I never had to touch this myself. You know, AppSync did it all for me. And to be honest, I have very limited experience with AWS. I've tried playing around with Lambdas and using the AWS playground, but you know, a big issue for me is I'm thinking about how do we keep this maintainable and managed? You know, are we always writing to the playground? How do we actually like get this code, you know, in a repo somewhere? Maybe explain a little bit how you guys do that.
So in our case, like when we build the feature, when we start in development, we just use the playground. So we just write in plain JavaScript. We actually start using TypeScript when we work on it in our project, when we're integrating it to our project. But during development phase, using JavaScript in the playground is very straightforward. You can just you can mock requests and see how your Lambda resolver will act on it to make sure everything was properly. And also, when we are actually deploying them, we don't use like the AWS UI to deploy, but we automate the process using something called infrastructure as code. And we use a tool called Terraform for this. Terraform is a very useful tool for automating deployments. It allows us to declare like what kind of infrastructure is needed for this product to work in a concise configuration file and have it constantly reproducible. And the result will be deterministic. Terraform will also let you know if you accidentally make a change. It will plan, like doing a dry run of the deployment and see what will change. And it will notify you, ask for your approval before you're actually doing it. So it's very safe, it's very convenient. You can deploy directly from your terminal. Yeah.
Yeah, and also since it's a CLI, you can just write scripts to automate everything. I love automation. If anything can get me to send one less command, I'll do it. I may spend longer time automating that than doing it. But Terraform, basically, what we also did was we automated the entire deployment flow. So also for the API and for the Lambda resolver, we have different deployments and with different scripts. We have one script that when run, it will build the Lambda function. It will transpile it with Webpack. It will deploy it on AWS. It will let you know, as Henry just mentioned, if there's a change, if there's no change. And if you authorize it to make the deployment, it will just do it. And if you lose your infrastructure for whatever reason, you need to recreate your infrastructure in a different region. You need to, just recreate it from scratch. It's as easy as just reperforming the command and it will create it.
Wow, I mean, that's so convenient. I mean, theoretically, AppSync has a lot to offer, and you guys have been using it for a while now. I mean, how long exactly?
I think it's been around like a few months.
A few months.
Yeah.
I mean, like since we're all here today, I guess like it must have been a success. So maybe just tell me a bit about like the kind of results you guys have seen from, you know, your AppSync journey. Yeah.
It was a success.
It was a success.
I think it went pretty well.
Yeah, it worked as expected. We received some good feedback by our users. They were able to finally synchronize their preferences between desktop version and also mobile version. One of the things that, one of the use cases actually for this feature is we provide a different tool called a different browser that allows users to access our services on mobile. And this browser is very security oriented, and it does not allow the usage of local storage. So what happened until this feature was out is we would store the information, the language, on local storage, and the user, every time they log into our application, they would have to manually change the language each time because the data would not be persisted. But now, like with this solution here, they are able to open the application on any browser, any terminal, phone or desktop, doesn't matter, and it would just work. And it's as if they never left their browser.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the next question I have is, I just want to let everyone out there know, if you're a front-end engineer and you want to get started with AppSync, I have your back. What are some of the common challenges you guys have faced, trying to get this set up? As something that, others might, expect to face in the future.
So one of the biggest challenges that we found was that we want to make this like even simpler without using like bundling or anything. And AppSync does come with like what they call a DynamoDB resolver. It allows your AppSync infrastructure to set or get data directly from DynamoDB, but that requires us to use like a separate language. It's called the Apache PTL, sorry. And it's not something that's really hard to study, but it's something extra that we needed to learn to keep to remember the syntax. And we try to avoid that. We want to make sure like this infrastructure is as front-end friendly as possible. So we decided to use the Lambda resolver where we can use JavaScript, and we eventually use TypeScript in the end. And also for TypeScript, we also initially wanted to generate types automatically. That's something that people usually do with APIs that uses the OpenAPI schema. It allows us to generate the type so that the client code can get the up-to-date type every time. But this is something that we tried, and we were not very pleased with how third-party libraries provide this functionality. So it's something that we are not pursuing yet. And I think we also have some others like the SDK.
Yeah, the SDK was also something we had to look into because Lambda function provides the SDK already. If you want, you can use the SDK that is provided by the runtime. When we were working on this feature, the SDK that was provided was the version 2. And we wanted, at the time, we wanted to work with the version 3. And so we had to find a way to bundle the version 3 without bundling the parts that we didn't need. We ended up, during the research, we ended up finding out that that is still a recommended thing to do, even if the built-in SDK is something that you're satisfied with, just because there may be some changes to the runtime, there may be updates that might break the SDK in some way, and you would be basically depending on that. So it's still better to still bundle your own SDK, but at the time we had to figure that out.
Yeah, no, I agree. You definitely don't want any unwanted surprises. So yeah, you guys are working on HENNGE email DLP, and do you see any future uses for AppSync and GraphQL now in your current application, besides the sort of thing you have already going on?
So right now we use it for language preference, and also to sync feature highlight. So we want to highlight new features that we release to the user and also get their feedback on those features. But we were already thinking of some other use cases where we can use AppSync to its fullest benefit. One of them is we wanted to have an option for the user to set their layout preference. They might prefer the buttons to be on top other than on the bottom, for example. They might also have different accessibility needs. Some people might want a bigger font, smaller font, a different font even. These are things that we previously didn't think too much about, but now that we have the infrastructure, we're now thinking of the possibilities of syncing this. Also, one recent thing that we thought of was also A/B testing.
Yes, that's also a very good use case. Before rolling out a new update that changes the UI in some way, we could use AppSync to provide a number of users with one type of layout and another number of users with another type of layout. or even just provide the choice to use one of the two layouts, a preview of what is coming, of how the layout is going to change in the future. You can kind of show them a small preview leading to this change so that users have the time to get used to it. Even just sometimes something that I notice that I would like to have when I use other applications or websites is when I'm always opening the same menu or opening the same menu and I refresh the page and the menu is closed again. Like sometimes the user may just want to keep that menu always open or keep a setting on the UI always in the same way. So that's also something that can be done and customized user by user.
I mean, that sounds amazing. For me, I'm thinking about the endless possibility of having cat wallpapers all over my HENNGE products. I mean, personally, that would bring me joy every day to work. But yeah, I just was a bit curious. I personally think this is a really cool tool. And, typically I have to work on, a front-end idea that I want to sketch out. And I spend a few days trying to build the back end. So this is definitely something that can benefit me. But what advice do you have for me if I wanted to get started with something like this?
Okay, so first, I think the important part is knowing how GraphQL works. It's not something very complicated, but some of the concepts we might need to get familiar with it to know how to make a request. And after that, get to know like AWS basics. AppSync communicates with Lambda and DynamoDB. So it's good to know like how they work, what kind of limitations they have, what kind of configuration options we have. Also, one very important thing in AWS, I think, is like knowing how permissions work to make sure like these different components in the AWS can communicate properly. Also, in the very beginning, I think like using the playground to try everything out is a very legit way to do it. You don't have to have a project ready in the client and start building from scratch. You can just use the playground, mock the request, test that everything is working, and then you will prepare the actual production ready with TypeScript and bundling and everything.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you guys have heard it here first. It's seamless. So, I mean, no reason not to get started. I mean, we now have, members in HENNGE who are now skilled in AppSync and GraphQL. Do you think there's a future for AppSync and GraphQL in HENNGE? Do you think, more teams might start adopting it?
We hope so, for sure. We have this culture at HENNGE where if a team tries a new technology, tries a new tool and succeeds in using it, we like to share that experience and like to share this information across teams. We have many we have opportunities to do these as well. We have monthly meetings dedicated to particular topics. We have a monthly meeting just for front end. We have a monthly meeting only for infrastructure related talks. And we use these opportunities to share our learnings. And we hope to do the same with this feature. It's been now tested and working for a couple months. I guess it's about time to make some kind of workshop or seminar or something internal and share the experience with the other teams.
I mean, amazing. It sounds amazing. And I'll definitely be there for both of you to, gain some of this knowledge. Yeah, I think it's been very insightful for me talking to the two of you today. And I've definitely learned a lot more about AppSync. And I hope everyone out there, has gained at least something out of this. And I think the next step would be just take some minutes to go through some Q&A and let's see what, there's quite a bit of questions out there, but, guys, keep it coming. Thank you. Okay. Okay, so we have a question from anonymous attendee. Thank you. Did you consider any other services other than AppSync for this feature?
Okay, thank you, anonymous attendee, for the question. We did consider some options, although they were all within AWS still, because we wanted, it was quite decided that we wanted to choose some solution provided by AWS. We briefly looked into other products such as API Gateway. So instead of using AppSync, we would be using this product that offers REST APIs instead of GraphQL APIs. And we wanted to build the same flow maybe with API Gateway. But we decided to go with AppSync mainly because we wanted to try GraphQL. It's a new technology, you know, the curiosity, we want to use these new tools. And also because it seems like the use case for AppSync is very well targeted towards sharing data between devices. Before AppSync, there was this other service, Cognito Sync. And the use case is specifically sharing preferences between devices and and user preferences across devices, sorry. So yeah, that's one of the options that we looked into.
Thank you. We've got another one from anonymous attendee. I'm guessing it's the same anonymous attendee. I mean, I've seen anonymous attendee, you know, quite often in these HENNGE talks, but what are the benefits of using GraphQL?
So that's the funny thing, actually. GraphQL is known for its flexibility. You can like customize what piece of data you want. You don't always have to get like the entire thing, but you can say like, okay, for this feature, I only need to get this specific feature, this specific field. And for that feature, I only need to get this specific field. And you don't need to create a function, like an API for each of them. You can just make the same GET call. But for the features that we are having right now, we are not actually using this. This is something that I think will definitely be useful in our future features when we start doing like A/B testing or something else. But as of now, we don't use it for anything that is highly customizable.
Yeah. Okay, we've got another question from Jaya. As a backend engineer who does a bit of front-end work, I'm curious to know whether you have any issues with scaling your Lambda-based systems, since Lambda does not allow DB connection pools. Has it ever been a bottleneck?
Okay, so scaling Lambda. So I think with Lambda functions, they already, when you call the Lambda function, when you call the resolver multiple times, Lambda function will already scale for you within the limits in your account. Normally, you already have up to 1,000 concurrent calls, concurrent instances. I think it's out of which 100, probably something like 900 is what you can actually use with a regular account, unless you request a limit upgrade. As for the database connection pools, one of the best practices with Lambda is to initialize the database connection not inside the handler, but outside of the handler function. And what happens is when you do that, your Lambda function context will be reused for other calls. So you will not be connecting to the database every time you run the function. You only connect once, and then all the subsequent calls will be reusing that context. So unless we're talking gigantic numbers of concurrent calls, that should not become a bottleneck at the beginning.
Cool. We've got a question from Rob. Now that you've tried out GraphQL, are you inspired to use it all the time in place of a RESTful API structure? Or do you think there's a right time and place for GraphQL versus REST? So now we've got the whole GraphQL versus REST faction. Yeah. Let's see. What do you guys think?
And there are some discussions, I think, about this. Like some people prefer one or the other. Some people think like GraphQL might not be necessary. It might be, I think most backend engineers might think like, it's good that the front end can customize it, but it's hard for us because we needed to make sure like every call that the front end team is making is not an expensive operation. Sometimes the back end gives something that the front end team might think, okay, that's actually simple, right? You can just query the table. But without knowing the table structure, you don't know like how expensive the operation is. So you're not sure like how that function call that might seem simple is actually consuming a lot of resources in the back end. I think this is like the common discussions on GraphQL. In our case, with AppSync, the GraphQL calls that we make is quite simple. we just update like the fields of a particular record directly. So I don't think performance would be an issue. And so far it's been pretty good, I think.
Yeah, I think I would definitely use it for my personal projects. I wouldn't mind going all GraphQL for personal projects. Of course, our product is already well established, so we are only using it for this feature specifically in our case.
Thank you for that wonderful question, Rob. We've got another question. Do the guides and documentation online show clearly how to put all the parts of the architecture together? It seems pretty complicated.
Sorry, can you repeat it?
So this person would like to know if the guides and documentations are clearly showing, how to get this all set up and put together.
I think like the official AppSync documentation.
Yes. The documentation is very well done, and as all documentations by AWS, I found very helpful some YouTube videos. I think it was the reInvent. There was a video in which they introduced AppSync, and they showcased how it works. That was very, very instructive. Also, there are countless videos on YouTube of people with different use cases. So you will see different types of ways to lay out your API and to structure your files. We went with this structure of having one index.js and then each operation having its own .js file, but it's not necessarily what you have to do. And there are many, many resources online that you can find to learn how to interconnect the products. As for AWS itself, if you just open the AppSync page, it's very well explained how it communicates with other services. And just the fact that you can use a Lambda function means that basically you can connect to and use any other AWS service.
Yeah, and I believe AWS provides a ton of content out there, YouTube videos, you can play around with the playground. I mean, the internet is a vast place.
Yeah.
Yeah, another question, was there an issue with automatic type generation tools, maybe that you mentioned before?
Yeah.
So for that one, we tried like several tools. Like I think one is from Amplify that AWS provided. The other one, I can't remember what that was.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly, but I think they had the same issue.
Yeah, the issue was that like the type that they generate are very broad, whereas in TypeScript, I think we want to have types as strict as possible to make sure like you're not accidentally sending incorrect data. But the type that they generate was like very, very like free,
very
like,
inclusive.
Yeah, very inclusive. Like every property is optional. This kind of type.
Yeah. Also, it had like, I think it had a key. So when you pull, when you use AppSync, when you generate types automatically, and there's a key in there that is like type name. I think I can't remember exactly the name of the key, but that was like a proprietary property, excuse the pun, that is only due to the fact that you're using AppSync. And we wanted to share the types, not only on the resolver side, not only on the AWS side, but also for our client side. We wanted the same type to be used both in Apollo, both in our actual pages, as well as on the resolvers. So that type didn't quite satisfy that need. So we ended up making custom types that we could use for both.
Thank you. I mean, TypeScript is always, creating a little bit of a headache there, but in the end, the benefit is always worth the extra work. So, yeah, definitely worth putting in that bit of effort. Yeah, we've got another question, which is, what kind of input sanitation do you guys use?
Okay, so in our case, like for the example that we have read just now, it was a simple Boolean mutation. So we didn't have to do any sanitation. If it's not true or false, then that's definitely not an issue. But then for mutations that submits a string value, a number value, we want to make sure like for security, just to make sure like there is no bad actor that tries to like attack our API, submit like a bad data, garbage data, tries to fill our database and incur cost to us. We do like a simple sanitation. We make sure that the data that we receive from GraphQL is indeed the data that we expect, which is like data that we can also define as enums on TypeScript in the client that we can share on both the client and the Lambda resolver. So if the data that is sent is not one of our accepted data, then we will just reject it. In our case, we have, for example, like the feature highlight function. And we know like both features that we accept in the array. So if the user tries to send something that is not part of the array, then we know that that request is not made by us. It's probably made by a bad actor that tries to like tamper with our API. So we can just reject that request.
I mean, that fits perfectly into the next question. I mean, we are a security company and tampering is not good. So are there any special considerations you need to think about when working for a B2B security software product? It's a question from Bell.
Any particular? I think in our use case, in the case of this specific implementation, one thing that we did not want to compromise was the authorization process. We did not want to have a different authorization method for this API, although it was a completely different and separated infrastructure. So as we briefly mentioned, we are using a custom resolver, a custom authorizer, Lambda authorizer, which allows us to use the same exact token that we use to authorize requests made to our backend. We embed the same exact token in the GraphQL calls. And so just the same way that we authorize a user for any API call on our backend, we can use also for authorizing them on AppSync. So that was one requirement that we had working with B2B. I guess if this was B2C, it could have been a little more lenient, but we definitely don't want to increase any steps or compromise on security. So we had to find a way to authorize the user using the same exact method and the same session.
Oh, thanks. And the next one, how closely do you work with the UI and UX team? So I guess any one of us could answer this, but
maybe you want to answer.
For me, I work fairly closely. We're constantly communicating when things need to be changed on the product that I currently work on. So yeah, it's easy communication. I think that's generally what it's like at HENNGE. You can easily communicate with members from other teams, and you just need to be in close discussion all the time. Yeah, what do you guys think?
We also work very closely with the UI UX, basically daily. For example, in the case of this feature, we mentioned that we were using it to track and the features that the user has seen or not. So basically, if we release a new thing, a new feature, a new menu, we want to redirect the user's attention towards that thing. You may see this often when you go on a website and it highlights something with like new or like it's glowing or something that indicates that this thing was not there. So we use that. We use this feature to do that, and we worked very closely with UI team, with the designers, to come up with a nice design that would not be would not get in the way of the user's workflow, but at the same time deliver the information. That is something that really only they can do. I would not be able to come up with a design that provides the information and also doesn't get in the way. Yeah.
And yeah, we usually communicate with them like through many channels. We have like weekly meetings. If we have something that we are not sure about the design, we can just we use Figma to share design and to like discuss the specification of the design. So we sometimes just leave a comment directly on Figma. Sometimes we just go through Slack and ask them if they have some time for a quick meeting. So yeah, I think our communication is very, very frequent.
Yeah. And now that you mentioned Figma, I mean, that just ties us back into the previous HENNGE talk. It was a very wonderful talk about Figma. And, please have a look at HENNGE blog and, HENNGE Design Magazine. That's some really cool stuff. Yeah, the next question is, how do you handle, sorry, my mistake. Okay, yeah, sorry. How do you handle development with this cloud store? I'm assuming they mean AppSync. For example, do you mark requests or data somehow?
For example,
Do you mark requests or data? So maybe this is regarding like, how do you test
Development.
maybe in a development environment?
Okay. So in our case, we use the playground mainly for development. When we use TypeScript, we cannot use it on the playground because the playground only accepts like pure JavaScript. So what we did is we write our prototype code in JavaScript, try it directly in the playground. And yes, as you mentioned, we do like mock requests. So in AWS Playground, you can run your Lambda function and pass like a custom argument. And that's what we use to like mock the request, see if we send this data, would it perform the correct actions?
Oh, it looks like we're about done with questions. So yeah, I think thank you so much for your time. It's been wonderful talking to you too. And maybe we can have an applause. Yeah. And I'll hand it over to Sean now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for the talk. I hope it was really insightful for those of you who understand it. It's a little bit above my technical pay grade, so I'm not really too sure, but hopefully all of you who are in the front end or maybe in the back end can definitely benefit from hearing how they approach the problem, how they solve the problem, and maybe how you can apply this to your own work as well. Thank you again to the audience for submitting your questions. Hopefully got answered. For those of you who couldn't, I'm so sorry we ran out of time. Please ask them through some other means. Also, you can ask them to the post session survey as well from the QR code just now. You can also connect with us on LinkedIn. Please, if you'd like to maybe reach out, ask some questions, we'll be happy to answer. And yeah, the next session of the day is next and final session is a new working style. So yeah, we're going to get into how we approach the new working style, the new normal, how we're going to tackle it going forward, and some of the things that we have tried to implement and improve our working culture throughout this difficult time that I think all of you are aware of. So yeah, thank you so much for your time today. Hopefully we will see you back here in an hour. So yeah, thank you so much again to our speakers. Yeah, thank you from all of us. Bye.